So my question after reading different seasons in week 1 of King Family February is, did these 3 amazing novellas translate into 3 amazing films? Stay with me and find out. Hi, welcome back to Bookish Brummy. My name's Mel and I like to review books, but sometimes I also like to talk about other things, and today we're going to talk about films. So for February I set myself a challenge which I called King Family February. So in this month I'm basically reading books that either Stephen King wrote or members of his family wrote, because as it turns out there are another 3 members of his family who are published authors. His wife Tabitha King has published some fiction, and so have his 2 sons Joe Hill and Owen King. Now, as a part of this readathon that I've been doing, I've also been trying to watch some Stephen King films. And in the first week of King Family February, I read Stephen King's novella collection Different Seasons, which was released in 1982. And in that novella collection, we had 4 novellas. There was The Body, The Breathing Method, Act Pupil, and Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. And as it turns out, 3 out of those novellas actually got made into films. So I thought that it would be really good if I went and tried to watch all of those films, so I could sort of see how I felt about the film compared to the book. So what today's video is going to be is we're going to be looking at the 3 films from different seasons, and we're going to be talking about my opinion of those films and how they sort of lined up to the book, and did I prefer the book over the film. Now, there might be a couple of spoilers in here, so if you've never seen the film or you've never read the books for any of these, then as I can't promise that there won't be spoilers, because it might be a little bit difficult to do comparisons on specific things like character traits without me delving a little bit into those characters. So yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll start off with the first novella in the Different Seasons collection, which is The Shawshank Redemption. So this was released into film in 1994. So this was, out of the 3 films that were released, this was the one that was released in the middle, but I would say that this is the one that has had the largest box office success. So the Shawshank Redemption, when it came out, apparently it didn't really actually do that well at the box office, but it's had a lot of longevity. So since it came out in 1994, many people have bought the DVD or downloaded it, or as opposed to just watching it at the cinema when it came out. And it stars Morgan Freeman as Red, and we also have Tim Robbins playing Andy Dufresne, so they're 2 quite popular actors as well. Now, I saw the Shawshank Redemption film maybe about 4 times before I ever got round to reading the novella. I didn't even know it was based on a Stephen King novella until somebody told me several years after I'd already watched the film, but I really loved the film. I thought it was absolutely great. So when I went into reading the novella, I'd actually seen, this is the first out of the 3 where I've actually seen the film before I've read the novella, and I have great expectations for the book because the film was really good. And what happens in The Shawshank Redemption is it's basically been narrated by Red, who has been an inmate at Shawshank Penitentiary for quite some time, and then Andy Dufresne basically comes to the penitentiary and he is sent there because he supposedly murdered his wife. Now, there's a bit of a joke in Shawshank that everybody that's in Shawshank is innocent, but over time Red really begins to think that Andy Dufresne is innocent. So basically we have Red telling Andy Dufresne's story, and that's exactly the same in the film as it is in the book. Now, I would say of the 3 films, I think that the Shawshank Redemption was still my favourite, but out of the 3 novellas that I'm going to talk about, I would say that it was my least favourite, and that's not because I didn't like it, it's just I scored the other 2 novellas 5 out of 5, and I scored the Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption at 4.75, and the only reason that it scored marginally less is because I think I just enjoyed the other 2 novellas a little bit more, but I also enjoyed the film so much, I think that it was really hard then to come back to the book as a comparison point, because the book didn't do anything wrong, and I still really liked the characters that were being spoken about in the book, but in the film I got to spend longer with the characters. There wasn't really any significant difference in the plot points as far as I could tell between the book and the film. There was a couple of things added in, I think, just to get us to spend more time with some characters, and just to extend it out long enough to be a film. There's one character who is assassinated by prison guards, and that assassination happens in a slightly different way in the book compared to the film, but there's nothing that's changed that dramatically affects the outcome of the film. The ending is not really changed as far as I can tell, and also the characters' intentions haven't changed. So we will see later on with one of the other films that I'm going to discuss how the character is actually completely changed by the direction that they took with the film. But the direction that they took with the Shawshank Redemption film was exactly the same as the book. I didn't think that the characters lost any of their essence, and I thought that the film was really, really good, and I also thought the novella was really, really good. So I recommend watching the film if you've never seen it, or if, like me, you had never read the novella. I do definitely recommend reading the novella. I think one of the other things as well when I came to read the book is that I had Morgan Freeman's voice in my head doing the narration of Red in the book, because he plays Red in the film. And I really love Morgan Freeman as an actor, and I think he's got a brilliant voice. So I definitely did hear his voice doing the voiceover in my head when I read the book. So I did enjoy that. So yeah, so that was the first one. The second film I think we can talk about, because of probably less controversy about how I feel about it, is Stand By Me. So the third novella in different seasons is called The Body, and that was obviously also published in the same novella collection in 1982, and this was the first one to be made into a film. So this actually came out in 1986, and we are following 4 young boys who are about 12 to 13 years old. So we're following Gordy, Chris, Vern and Teddy, and they hear from overhearing one of their older brothers talking that there's this young lad who's 12 years old called Ray Brower, and he has been missing for quite some time. And these young lads, they overhear one of the older brothers saying that they actually found the body on a train track in one of the nearest, near to one of the nearer towns, but out in the countryside. So these boys, they decide to go on a mission because they want to go and see this body. Now I think at first they sort of agree to go on this mission because it's just out of morbid curiosity. But I think as the journey goes on, the impact of what that really means becomes apparent to them. That they are actually visiting somebody who is their own age, a boy that has died accidentally. And I think right at the start in the book and the film, they're not really given that away as anything that's upsetting to them, but as they get closer to finding the body, and when they do find the body, obviously then their emotions start to bubble over about how they feel about that situation. Now again, I don't think that the film did anything too different from what the book did. I thought the book was absolutely brilliant. I really do like a coming of age story, and I think Stephen King writes these really, really well, especially when he puts himself into the head of like a 12 to 13-year-old boy. I think he just does it really, really well. And in the book, our boys are swearing and they're smoking, and they're off wandering around on their own, running away from dogs. And I think that when they actually filmed the film then, because they filmed it in the 80s, they filmed it almost as a match to the book. So I was quite surprised when I was watching the film, and I think I'm only surprised because I'm watching it today in 2026, and obviously this film was made in 1986, so we're talking 40 years ago. But the boys are actually smoking. Several times in this film you see the boys holding cigarettes, they're actually smoking, and they are swearing, and probably behaving like a person who's a lot older than what they are, and they even have a gun as well, which they all holding at one point. And yeah, I was surprised because I think in today's sort of world, I don't know that we would film that film as accurately to the book as what the book suggests, but I do think for the time that this book was written, these boys would have been growing up, I think, in the 70s. Yeah, I think they'd have been growing up in the 70s. So I think, that life would probably have actually been like that for them. I certainly remember when I was growing up in the 90s that we used to wander miles away from home into the countryside looking for like tree houses and, I don't know, brooks, flowers, different animals, you know, and then we would return at dinner time for our dinner. You know, and there was the possibility of coming across things like cigarettes. Obviously, I live in the UK, so the gun laws were a little bit differently, so I'm not sure that we would have been able to take a gun from a parent. But, you know, I think what I'm trying to say is that the film was very authentic. It was very authentic for the time that those boys are meant to have been growing up, and it was authentically filmed, like, in comparison to the book. And I really appreciated that, because I think we would have lost something if we'd have tried to polish the boys and make them so that they weren't doing all of those things, because I think it's all of those things, as well as the journey that they're actually on to see their first dead body ever, is what actually is the coming of age bit, is what sort of turns them into young men, basically. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. The only sort of major differences that I kind of saw, I suppose, was that, as I mentioned, they did have a gun, and in the book that gun just is brought by Chris, and it's only Gordy who is aware that the gun exists until they get set upon by some older boys once they have actually reached this young lad's body, and then the gun is pulled out, and that is when the other boys in the group become aware of that gun, so nobody really knows it's being carried until then. Whereas in the film, they're sort of waving it around quite early on. All of the boys know that they have it, and then there's like a scene where they're camping out and they're scared from some noises in the woods, so they all take it in turns holding the gun while they're on guard, and that didn't like actually happen in the book. But I didn't really mind it being in the film because, you know, I think young lads play, and I think that's probably like maybe what they would have done if they'd have known the gun was there. They probably would have all had a bit of a hold of it and had a play with it. Now the story in itself, the body, as I said, I really enjoyed this story because I thought that it was just not something you'd ever really thought of before. I mean, like, it's really quite horrible, isn't it, to think that there's a dead child somewhere and then other children are like on a pilgrimage to go and see it. Yeah, like, I've never really heard of a story like that before, so I think it's quite a you know, unique story in itself. And I thought that the film was, as I said, was a really close match to the book with regards to how it did at the cinemas. This was actually quite a big hit in the 80s, and it did really, really well. It's just the longevity of it hasn't outstood the Shawshank Redemption, which is why the Shawshank Redemption would, from the box office over time, have actually made more money than Stand By Me. But Stand By Me actually did very, very well when it came out. It also has some like really quite famous actors in it. Now, I've only ever seen these actors as adults, so it was really interesting to see them as 12, 13-year-olds, and I really had to sort of try to imagine it. So I got their adult picture up online, and I was sort of watching the film, like watching the, you know, the child them, and then looking at pictures of an adult to see, can I actually see that person in that person? So yeah, Gordy LaChance, who's one of our main characters, is actually played by Will Wheaton, and Chris Chambers is played by River Phoenix. And then there is another character called Ace Merrill, who's one of the older boys, who's a bully. He's played by Kiefer Sutherland. So there's quite a few big names in this film as well. So I definitely recommend, if you enjoyed reading the Body novella, I'd say that the film is a really good match to the book, and I don't think that you would be disappointed. Likewise, if you've watched the film Stand By Me, I think if you went and read the Body, the novella, you wouldn't be too surprised. There aren't any major differences. So that brings us on to our third film, which is Apt Pupil. I think the light's just bouncing off that a bit. Okay, so this one did the worst in the box office, if I'm honest. It came out just before Halloween, apparently, and was considered a commercial flop. And yeah, it didn't receive much box office success, and I'm not sure that it's really brought in that much money, although by no means the worst of all the different Stephen King adaptions. So Apt Pupil came out in 1998, so it's the latest one out of the three to come out on film, but obviously still nearly 30 years ago. Now again, we have some quite big name actors in this. We follow two main characters. We have Todd Bowden, who is played by Brad Renfro, and then we have Kurt Dusander, who is played by Ian McKellen. But if you are a Friends fan, I'll also mention that David Schwimmer is in this film as a very, very young man, playing the character called Rubber Ed, who is the school guidance counsellor. That's what they call him in America, like guidance counsellor. So in Apt Pupil, you'll know that if you've been following this series, that was my favourite of all the novellas in different seasons. So it's my favourite one out of the 4. Definitely gave it a 5-star. I thought it was absolutely super creepy, like the storyline that was being followed. So it's a bit of a shame that it actually ranks my lowest out of the 3 films as to how it then translated into a film. So we'll just get into what my problems with it were, I suppose. So the actual storyline in a nutshell is Todd Bowden, who's 13 going on 14. He turns up at this old man's house and you think he's just delivering a paper to this man called Mr. Denker. And then when Mr. Denker opens the door, Todd accuses him of being a man called Kurt Dusander, who is an ex-Nazi war criminal who commanded a prison camp and is responsible for the death of many, many people, and essentially he's hiding out in America under this name, Arthur Denker. So Mr. Denker obviously refuses to believe, well, not refuses, but he refutes what Todd is saying to him, but Todd sort of has evidence actually that he is Mr. Dusander, so in the end Mr. Dusander can't sort of deny that that's who he is. So then Todd goes on to blackmail him over time for information about what Mr. Dusander actually did in the prison camps, you know, and he doesn't want money, he just wants details, and he is absolutely morbidly obsessed with what actually happened in there, what the reactions of the victims were, how they died, like just absolutely horrendous. And I think, you know, the book, the character of Todd, he's written so well. You see him descending into this psychopathy to do with this subject, and his interest in it has actually existed way before he met Kurt Dusander, and that's really worrying. And I did a video on this the other week where I actually did a character analysis of Todd Bowden, so you can actually find that in the King Family February playlist if you're interested to watch it. But I found Kurt to be an absolutely fascinating character for somebody so young, and then the way that Stephen King has written him, sort of showing a timeline of before he met Kurt Dusander as to how he began to have interest in Nazi war crimes, and how that interest wasn't like a historical interest in the sense of learning about it to sort of just write history papers or warn other people about what had happened. His interest is in it because he enjoys reading about it, and that's really disturbing. And then he meets Mr. Dusander, and essentially Mr. Dusander sort of unlocks something in Todd, I think, and so that interest that he had started to develop just becomes rapidly more and more, and he escalates. And as he is sort of aging through this story as well, his obsession starts to take on sexual connotations as well, and his anger starts to build. Now you could say as well, because of the age he is, he's obviously just hitting puberty, so he's obviously got a lot of hormones as well, and when your role model is somebody who is an ex-Nazi prison camp leader, really where can that lead Todd? Nowhere good. So in the book, I think that we trace this timeline with Todd's development into psychopathy really well, and also in the characters that are around him, how they perceive him. I think that's written really well as well. I felt like a lot of this was lost in the film. Now don't get me wrong, I think the actors did a really good job, and I think that Brad Renfro did a really good job of Todd in, you know, that creepy sort of almost like spoiled child, I'm going to get what I want when I want it, and I'm totally evil, but I can also charm the pants off people. You know, Brad Renfro played that part really well. The issue, I think, was that there were scenes that were basically cut or changed throughout this film that should have been bought from the book. Because for me, the main point of Apt Pupil, the book, the main horror of it was you know, the character of Todd Bowden. Like, obviously, Mr. Denker, or Mr. Dusander, whatever you want to call him, he's horrific in himself with the war crimes that he has done. But the actual horror of the book is watching Todd develop into this psychopathy. And that was missed a fair bit in the film. And I felt like in the film, it was written in a way where Todd was more innocent than he actually was. It was almost like that he knew who Mr. Dusander was, but they sort of filmed it in a way where Mr. Dusander seems to look like he leads Todd on more than he actually does, and Todd seems to be a lot more innocent. For example, we know in the book that Todd is murdering vagrants at one point to get his anger out. Not even mentioned in the film, but in the film we see Mr. Dusander murdering vagrants, and then obviously there is a point where Mr. Dusander has a heart attack while he's in, you know, the process of burying somebody that he has murdered, and he has to call Todd round to help him clear up the mess basically before he can go to hospital. But in the film they've reframed this and they've had it so that Mr. Dusander has a heart attack mid-murder. He calls Todd, but they think that the guy is dead, and then when Todd goes down into the basement to bury this guy suddenly jumps up alive, and Todd is forced into a position where he basically ends up killing this vagrant. So in the film it looks like Mr. Dusander's actions have caused Todd to have to murder somebody, but it's really not the case, because in the book Todd had already murdered several people off his own bat without being forced to by Mr. Dusander. Again, at the end of the film, you know, we have a situation where the guidance counsellor, Rubber Ed, comes to question Todd about, well, he wants to talk to Todd's parents really about who Todd's grandfather actually is, because, you know, he's now seen that the man in the paper who's accused of being a war criminal was the man that turned up into his office pretending to be Todd's granddad, but obviously he's not Todd's granddad. And in the film, you know, Todd tries to say, I'll accuse you of being inappropriate and molesting me if you don't back off, you know, and Rubber Ed walks away. But this is not what happens, because in the book, he actually just opens fire with his gun on Rubber Ed and kills him. And then, you know, the book ends where basically Todd goes on a shooting spree. But this shooting spree is being worked up to throughout the book when he actually gets his gun, and the time he spends cleaning his gun, thinking about killing people with it, and then the times that he goes and actually aims his gun while it's fully built at people on the freeway. We don't get any of this in the film, but it is in the book. So this is what I'm trying to say, like, really disappointed me in a way, because there was a lot of character growth in the book pointing, you know, at how Todd was developing into a psychopath slowly, and then had his final blow up where essentially he then went on a gun rampage, and none of that happens in the film. I found the ending to the film really quite disappointing. So yeah, I have to say, like, my opinion of the film is quite low, and had I watched the film first, I probably wouldn't have thought, oh, I must go and read the book. But having read the book first, it made me think, oh, I want to go and watch the film, especially when I heard that Ian McKellen was in it, because I was like, I bet Ian McKellen will play Mr. Dusander really well, and he did. Ian McKellen did make a really, really good Mr. Dusander. I just think my problem with that Pupil film is they had some really good actors in it. I just didn't enjoy the way that they actually then decided to tell the story. They lost a lot of Todd's character in it. And yeah, so that just really wasn't for me. So obviously there's probably a lot more that we could say about these films, but I just wanted to do a quick review of, after I'd watched the film and also read the novella, how I thought they stacked up against each other, because there has been quite a few Stephen King film adaptations over time. I mean, I've got probably like 7 or 8 of them downstairs on my shelf, and you know, there's probably been over 20. There's been absolutely loads, and in my experience, for the most part, the film adaptations aren't really always as great as the book. Like, for example, The Green Mile, I've never read the book, but that's an absolutely outstanding film. So we will do a film comparison between the book and the film when I get round to that. but there's like other ones where, you know, the budget has been so poor on the film, you just think like it's terrible for that reason, or it just, you know, it failed to get the essence of the book into the film, which was another reason why, you know, I've sort of not liked Stephen King film adaptations in the past. So, you know, some of them are really great, like Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile have been really, really great, but there's others that are not really that good, and unfortunately I would put Apt Pupil into the pile of not so good. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below if you've watched any of those 3 films, and if you've also read the novella and how you felt that the one stacked up against the other. Particularly interested in what people thought about Apt Pupil, the film, in comparison to the book, because I think out of the 3, that is the one that has the most differences and the most significant differences, I think, to the outcome of the story. So yeah, please remember to join me on Monday if you'd like to see the final book reviews for King Family February of what I'm reading this week. And thanks for watching this video. If you've liked it, please press the thumbs up button, and if you'd like to see my future content, please press the subscribe button, and I'll see you soon. Bye!